Last time you have been here in Budapest, 1972. How did your way of living and your way of thinking change since these 10 years?
I've become more dangerous and more reckless.
How you mean it?
Oh, yes. I was much more careful 10 years ago. And now I've changed into something very dangerous, very reckless, very volatile. No knowing what I'm going to do next.
But you didn't know before, did you?
No, never.
So, this is a way of changing your character?
Well, in a sense, yes. You understand as a certain kind of curious thing happens, you become rather more patient than one was. You become rather more tolerant, rather more compassionate about people and things and ideas and whatever it is. You certainly changed a great deal. I have no idea what I was like 10 years ago. The person that was here 10 years ago was, to me, a total foreigner. I don't know who he was.
And how did your way of living change?
No, it remains more or less the same.
How do you live?
Very well.
Thank you. In which country is your home?
Well, wherever the books are.
And where are they?
Well, there are three sets. One's in London, one's in Mexico, and one's in Switzerland.
And what is your home?
Wherever the books are.
So you have got 3 homes?
Yes.
How much time do you spend there in each?
Oh, very little. I work so much that it's very difficult to say where I live. I would say that fundamentally the basic home base is Switzerland.
How many time do you spend there a year?
Oh, I don't know. If I'm lucky, maybe 2 weeks. I live in hotels.
How can you do that?
I don't know. I've certainly become one of the world's greatest specialists on hotels. I can tell you what hotels are like. This is a great hotel. I mean, I don't know if it's a great hotel, but this is a great room. This is a great place. You see, at the edge of this hotel lives the Danube. On the other side of the river, as you know, is Buda. And here we live in Pest.
Thank you for the geographic description. I would like to know...
Geographical description, right?
Thank you. You were born in Wales. You are Welshman, aren't you?
Yes.
Would you tell me something about your childhood? How many people were there in your family? Would you tell me something about your father? Would you tell me something about your age till the age of 14, when you were Jenkins?
Well, I've told the stories so often that they bore even me, right? I'm one of 13 children. My father was a miner. My mother was a barmaid. And I'm the 12th of 13 children, 4 of whom are now dead. And so there's still quite a lot left around. As a matter of fact, it would have been possible, even in this fabulous hotel, it would be impossible to get all of my family into this room. It's so enormous. The in-laws, the nephews, the nieces, and all that.
How did you live at that time?
Hmm?
How did you live at that time?
Well...
At the elementary school, at the secondary?
How did the family live, you mean?
How did the family, and how did you?
Well, the family, we had a little house which had 2 rooms upstairs and 2 rooms downstairs. And so everybody had to switch around. It's very difficult to accommodate such an enormous family. And just enchanting, very happy childhood I had and all that. Certainly all the miners, they were all miners. You know, my brothers were, apart from my younger brother, they were all miners. Eventually, they weren't miners. They became something else. They became very successful in other directions, but they started off being miners. And so there were 2 beds, for instance, in one room, and 2 brothers would sleep in the 2 beds, and the other 2 brothers would go to work. And my father and another brother would also go to work. And then they come home and they sleep in the 2 beds, and so they'd switch around, so the bed was always warm.
Could you tell me something about your father's character?
Well, he was adorable, charming, vulgar, sweet, intelligent, kind, generous, and had an extraordinary gift for words.
And towards children, how did he behave?
With a kind of bland indifference. He didn't quite know which one we were. There were so many of us. And I remember going home once to Wales, and I went to the house where my father lived, and I said in Welsh, "Le ma fe," which means, "Where is he?" And they said, "Where do you think?" So I went to the pub, and he was sitting there by the fire. He was a very small man, very powerful, but very short. He was sitting by the fire, and he was mulling his ale. You know, he had a pint of beer, and he had a poker in it, you know, to make it hot. And he said, he looked up, and he was slightly purblind from the coal dust. You know, coal dust gets into your eyes and makes your eyes weak. And he looked up and he said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm his son." And he said, "Which one?"
That's it. I have heard that, so far as I know, your mother died at age when you were 2, right?
Yeah.
So how come that you are Jenkins and you turned to be Burton? Would you tell me the story?
Well, it's a rather complicated story, actually, because what happened was that there was an Englishman called Burton, who was the senior master at the school that I went to, the secondary school. And I was applying to go to Oxford University. And the Welsh are quite clever. Apart from the Italians, I should think they're about the cleverest race in Europe. And so the Welsh were dominating Oxford University, so the Oxford people were trying to keep us out. And so it was suggested that it would be a good idea if I changed my name from Jenkins, which is a very Welsh name, to Burton, which is a very English name, so they wouldn't realize I was a Welshman when I went to Oxford. And so that's
But in our previous conversation, you told me that you had to leave the secondary for a while because the family was out of money.
Yes, I worked as a haberdasher.
How did you enjoy it?
Not very well.
So about how you started your actor career.
Ah.
About the career, how you started, the boring story for you. I would like to ask you. Yeah? Already?
All right. Well, I got this entrance into Oxford University, but I was young to go. I was only 16 years old. And a very unique thing happened, I think unprecedented, certainly in my world. An advertisement, because during the war, you must understand that all the young men were called up. They were drafted into the Army or the Navy or the Air Force. And so it was very difficult to find young men. And though I was 16 years old, I was exactly the same size as I am now, and I thought there was an advertisement in the paper which said that Emlyn Williams, the famous Welsh playwright and actor, was looking for a young man of 22 who could speak Welsh and who could act. Now, I knew I could speak Welsh. I wasn't too sure that I could act. Anyway, I applied for the job, and I got it. And it seemed to me the millennium. I thought it was the second coming, because they paid me £10 a week, and the top money for a minor in those days was £3 a week. So suddenly I got £10 a week. I thought the end of the world had come. And that's how I became an actor.
What did you read at Oxford, and for how long?
I was there only for 1 year, but it might have been 50 years. It seems a very long time. I read English and medieval Italian.
How come that you chose these subjects?
Well, English, for obvious reasons. Medieval Italian, because I was surrounded by Italians. In Wales, there are a great many Italians.
So what happened after the Oxford University? So far as I know, there was only one year.
After Oxford University, because the war was on, so I flew in the Royal Air Force and the RAF, and I was a navigator in the Air Force. And I was in for like 3.5 years, something like that.
Where have you been as a navigator?
All over Germany. And actually I was on my way to, like so many others, on my way to bomb the Japanese. And we were, as it were, province hopping across Canada. And we left Winnipeg and we were on our way to Calgary, I think, when the wireless operator said, the war's over. We dropped the atom bomb. I didn't know what the atom bomb meant at that time. I was 19 years old.
So this 3.5 years had no influence on your life later on?
Oh, yes.
What sort of influence?
I learned fear.
Did you? Mm. Well, after play, you came back, you were in the theater again.
Mm.
And you played innumerable Shakespeare plays, right?
Well, I played quite a lot of them, yes.
You played Hamlet, both in England and both in the States, directed by Sir John Gielgud.
Well, the first Hamlet was at the Old Vic, and it was directed by a man called Michael Bentor. And then 10 years later, I did it again, because I didn't think I was very good. Actually, I think I was impersonating John Gielgud in the first Hamlet. The second Hamlet, he directed me in it, and I didn't impersonate anybody, I just did myself.
And what sort of difference between the two performances in the States and in England?
Well, I don't know how to describe it. I would say that the English performance of Hamlet was Italianate. You know, I played with very black hair, and terribly kind of melancholy and all that. The second performance was manic, demonic. It was absolutely me. I didn't bother with all the people I'd seen. Everybody derives from everything. If you write a line when you're very young, whatever you write, it derives from somebody, right? Yeah. Somebody taught you the language, right? And so as an actor, in the initial stages, you derive from somebody else, you copy somebody else until you find exactly your own style, and then it changes and you become absolutely yourself.
Could you feel any difference between the audience of the two nations, the English audience and the American one?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Can you express it with words? What was it?
Well, the English are very reserved as an audience. They watch you. They're very nice. They watch you, and they're very, very clever, very intelligent audience. The American audience is not so intelligent, but it's much more generous.
How you mean that?
There's a kind of warmth that comes from the Americans that the English don't have.
How come that you are playing recently, mainly in American theaters, and you never go to England?
Because I don't like to pay English taxes.
Money has got such a great important role in your life.
Money is the most important thing in the world.
Why?
Without it, we cannot live.
That's what intrigued me when I saw the film for the first time, is I loved how it so beautifully transitioned from the scope and the size of the time and the events of that time to the smallest, most intimate, and yet both were always present in one another. You know, you never lost a sense of that human being, Lincoln, within the broader picture. And yet you never lost a sense of that broader picture in the solitary, most intimate moments, private moments of him. I loved that. I just thought it went from big to small and small to big, just so beautifully. I thought that was stunning, and that's, you know, due to the great efforts of Stephen and Tony Kushner, you know, who just crafted something so beautiful.
What did you learn about Lincoln the man from doing this film? And what do you think, maybe did you learn anything different when you watched the film than from being a part of it? Do you think audiences, do you think they might?
Absolutely. I learned a lot watching it. I don't know whether I learned a lot, but I was just so curious to see it, and from moment to moment. And I think it's easy to look at Lincoln as somebody who is this granite figure that is carrying effortlessly the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yeah. And I thought it was great to see his struggle, and to see him trying to be funny and trying to make sense of his life. For me, it was incredibly exciting, and I was riveted by watching this man who, to so many of us around the world, is such a frame of reference for us, and yet not a memory, and is sort of granite in his ability to carry the weight of the world at that time, his world. To be able to see through that, and to see his world, and to see his struggle with that, and to see him trying to be funny, and to see him argue with his wife, and to see the grief that he was carrying around, and yet this enormous feeling of responsibility. I think Daniel's performance in this film is just beautiful, I think. And for me, it defined the best that I could imagine of that time. Because it allowed some of the worst, it allowed for that. It allowed for weakness, and it allowed for frailty, and it allowed for indecision, and when you allow for that, then a decisiveness and a conviction is all the more hard fought for. It's, in a way, you're seeing something almost unimaginable, and yet you're seeing it presented in such a humane and compassionate and sensitive and intimate way, which Steven Spielberg just put together so delicately and so perfectly, as far as I'm concerned.
The Story of the Kings of Summer. It's a film about three young men who are driven into the woods. They're driven to run away from home by overbearing parents. I play the father of the main boy, Joseph Toy, who is having a tough time at home. We have lost his mother and my wife recently. She died, and we're both in the same kind of pain, and so I sort of take it out on my son and drive him into the woods. And he takes two friends with him, and they build a house to run away to, and it is there they learn some lessons about what it means to become a man, while the town goes crazy looking for them.
Can you describe your character, Frank Toy, particularly what kind of dad he is and how that contributes to Joe's desire to go with it on his own?
My character, Frank Toy, the father of Joe, the main character, is he's a good dad. He's a loving man, but he's in pain, and unfortunately, his son is at that age when fathers and sons are butting heads, no matter how good their relationship is. And so we're ignorant to the fact that we're both in the same kind of pain, and all we really need to do is hug it out and tell each other we love each other. But instead, we sort of both put up an emotional wall, and I take out my frustrations on my son by being rather overbearing and a little too much of a disciplinarian, which ultimately drives him away.
How did you become involved with this project?
My agent, I share an agent at UTA with the director, Jordan Vogt Roberts, and my agent gave me the script and said, we need an intensely angry and slightly unattractive person to play the main character's father, and everybody thought of you immediately. And so I read the script by Chris Galletta and was quite taken with my character's emotional arc. I was really excited to get to play somebody who gets to go on a little bit of an emotional journey, and at the same time, the script was one of the funniest things I've read in a long time. So I jumped on board without hesitation. I was really thrilled with it.
What was it like working with your wife, Megan Mullally?
What was it like working with my wife, Megan Mullally? She is rather a hero to me, and so it's much like I would think it would be working with Carol Burnett or John Cleese, other heroes of mine. She is an incredible comedy legend and easy on the eyes to boot. So the hardest thing about working with her is keeping a straight face. She's so funny, and Mark Evan Jackson as her husband, the two of them were just a devastating comedy duo of cloying parenthood.
Great. Please talk about working with Alison Brie and Nick Robinson, who play your kids in the film, as well as the other cast members.
The cast of this film is astonishing. I have to tip my cap to Jordan Vogt Roberts, the director, the wunderkind who was 27 when we shot it. Alison Brie and Nick Robinson as my children were quite lovely. I once played Kirsten Dunst's brother in a film, and I take relatives like these as a high compliment. Their mother must have been terribly cute. And Allison, humorously, is 11 years my junior. So I must be an old soul to so convincingly play her dad. But they were just a gas. This was the first time I got to really be friends with Allison, and she was a wonderful professional and super funny. And Nick was quite irksome in his competence and his maturity at his age to carry a film like this, as well as his cohorts, Gabriel and Moises. They all just had their stuff together in such a way. And I would think of myself at 18 years old, and it made me very angry. Aaron as well, Aaron Moriarty. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any cute young ladies, but Erin does a nice job. She has a great personality.